Good morning and good afternoon, and most welcome to this second part of our dialogue series. And we are United Nations Development Program, covering a wide range of important issues, trying to respond to the situation that we're in, the unprecedented times that you're all so aware of. 9 trillion of global costs with regard to economy, 400 million lost jobs, and then we know that well above 60% of the global workforce actually work in the informal sector. And as we know and have heard the last weeks, 100 million people being pushed into extreme poverty. This requires a lot from the international community, and we want, as the United Nations Development Program, to be your network, to learn from what we hear and experience in countries, together with colleagues in the UN system and beyond. We are looking for partnerships, we're looking for coordination, and we are looking for new ideas. We have responded quickly to the call from countries and communities and repurposed funds, and we have also engaged with partners with new funds, also well beyond the UN system, also with the international development banks. We are fully operational in 170 countries, and we really want to make the utmost out of the mandate that we have been given by the United Nations and the member states. In March, we decided to be part of the humanitarian response and the health response, and we then supported countries to prepare, to respond, and to recover. But now we have presented, as of June, a new offer that is called Beyond Recovery towards 2030, because we believe that in the midst of the crisis, we need to look for more long-term development solutions, because what we see, of course, is that the crisis has become so deep because of the lack of sustainable solutions in the 3 aspects of the Sustainable Development Goals, both inclusive economy that is lacking, the area of social sustainability. And yesterday you may have seen that we presented an interesting proposal with regard to that, social protection through universal basic income or temporary basic income. And then of course also the important area of sustainable societies that we would like to see. Now, we are here to discuss an important topic that is also part of this offer. UNDP has said that we want to support countries with regard to governance, with regard to the green economy, social protection, but we have also lately looked much more closely into the digital space. In the Human Development Report that we presented last year, you could see that the digital space creates fantastic opportunities for people and for countries. But also we see that lack of equality within the digital space can also be one of the biggest hindrances for a sustainable development. So with these few words, I will hand over to colleagues that I have with me today. Robert Opp, you will lead together with colleagues also from Uganda the discussion, and then at the end of our discussion I will also hand over to my colleague Haoliang Shu, who's leading our policy department. My name is Erika and I'm leading the Bureau for External Relations and Advocacy within UNDP. Throughout the session, you are most welcome to think about your questions or suggestions and put them in the chat function or in the Q&A function, and we will together as colleagues also try to respond in written, or also bring your questions also to the participants and the panelists. So with these few words, over to you, Robert.
Well, thank you very much, Ulrika. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to all of you, wherever you are. As Ulrika mentioned, my name is Robert Opp, and I'm UNDP's Chief Digital Officer. And it's a pleasure to be with you today to tell you a little bit about what is going on in terms of digital response to COVID-19 within UNDP. So I'm going to start with a presentation, and then we're going to have a little bit of ability to interact with some of the projects. We're going to tell you a little bit about some of the examples of going on, and we have 2 very special guests to introduce to you later as well for a short fireside chat. As this is an informal coffee chat, we're trying to do something a little different with the format to try to keep things very conversational and informal. So I will start by talking about where Ulrika left off, which is we have been going through these informal coffee chats to look at each of the pillars of UNDP's Beyond Recovery COVID response offer, which is really based, as Ulrika said, around these 4 areas of governance, social protection, green economy and digital disruption. And they all support the overall UN Development System framework for socioeconomic recovery as well. I think the first thing I would say is that UNDP, before COVID hit, has already been investing in its innovation and digital architecture. So I think many of you, or hopefully all of you, will be aware that UNDP has created a digital strategy that was released early last year. The digital strategy sets out a course and a path for the digital transformation of UNDP as an organization. And it really talks about two main pathways of transformation, one being the areas in which we interact with our programs and our partners, so the kind of external facing, and the second one being the internal facing, so reforming and changing our internal systems. As Chief Digital Officer, my role is to oversee both of those changes and pathways. There have been a lot of things that have gone on, though, that make a part of this overall effort toward next-gen UNDP, which our administrator, Achim Steiner, often refers to, even before the digital strategy. So there's the investment that's being made in the accelerator labs that are around the world, 60 of them right now, soon to be 90 of them. There has been a strong innovation facility in place, and there's a new shift going on in strategic innovation in the organization. And then as part of digital, we've launched several corporate digital initiatives, different platforms and areas to support the organization's work. We have around 2,000 people of staff of the organization that have been trained in digital skills. And we're about to roll out a network of digital advocates across the world that will be able to really help support this digital shift for the organization, all coming from the conviction that the shifting situation and context of digital technologies presents us with significant opportunities to embrace digital as tools to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals. And also, it introduces a number of challenges that we have to be aware of as well. But this is about making UNDP a digital savvy, digital enabled organization. And a number of those investments have resulted in capacities around the organization. If we look at us as a global organization, we have several areas of expertise or centers of expertise around the world, whether it be, for example, the CGOB initiative in Latin America or the Bangkok Regional Innovation Center, or some of our global capacities like the Singapore Global Center for Technology and Innovation, the Oslo Policy Center, which has work going on for misinformation and digital platforms, and several other areas that are emerging across the organization as these sort of centers of excellence. And we're not finished yet, because there are investments that are currently being made to build our capacity in other places in the region of Africa, Arab states, and beyond as well. We use a lot of partnerships to help with our digital effort. They are key to giving us access to expertise and ensuring that we have the impact that we want and need to have for digital. So whether it's our interagency partners like WFP working together in the Republic of Congo on digital payments, or whether it's Global Pulse working together on different crisis insights, UNCDF working on digital finance offer, or whether it's our kind of bilateral relationships, our private sector relationships that are growing and creating global agreements, or our IFI partners. In particular, I want to mention that we've had very good collaboration with the European Investment Bank, releasing recently a report on the state of IT and technology in Africa. We've also been discussing with the World Bank how we can work in a more complementary way as well. So these partnerships are critical to enable us to be able to have the impact that we need to have. Now, I think when we turn to COVID, when COVID hit, I think that these investments that were already underway have really helped us mount a response to COVID. And the COVID crisis itself, I think it's important to mention, has a very digital element to it, if I can say it that way. It is clear that digital has been a key to enable the response of countries that are seeking to find ways to actually respond to the pandemic itself and mitigate the impacts. But the COVID-19 pandemic has also revealed this digital divide that Erika mentioned, that there are people who are able to take advantage of those tools that enable social distancing and enable a fast response to COVID. But it also, if you're not on the right side of the digital divide, or if you're on the wrong side of the digital divide, as we know nearly half the population of the world is, you're not able to benefit from that. So it kind of highlights how important digital is. At the same time, it's also revealing a number of challenges, such as the misinformation, or the infodemic, as our Secretary General has called it, around the misinformation being spread rapidly on digital platforms around COVID. When UNDP started responding to COVID, we very quickly looked at the areas of response that were being seen in terms of requests from governments and what was happening in the field. And those areas of response can be essentially grouped into three main categories. So one, if I can start from the bottom of this chart, one is around the basic level of infrastructure and capacity building. So we received requests and responded to requests for procuring equipment or training civil servants so that they can keep on digital platforms, so they can keep working from home, or finding ways to get licenses for video conferencing platforms like this one. So really helping the kind of business continuity with our government partners. Then there's a whole element around digital solutions and digital tools, where our countries have leapt into responding to the kinds of requests or the kinds of gaps that are being seen. So whether it's data platforms to help really inform government responses, whether it's digital financing or e-commerce platforms, which we're going to talk about in a little bit, really finding ways to move government into the online space so that in a context in which social distancing becomes important, people can still access the life-saving or life-supporting services that governments offer. And then that third level at the top around technology guidance, where you know, it's not necessarily the case that every government has the capacity to really deal with some of the new technologies coming forward, such as contact tracing, and needing to look at issues like data privacy and other factors around regulatory policies and frameworks. And actually, it has been very interesting to see. We had a virtual explosion of digital responses inside the organization together with our partners. We are currently tracking over 180 of these, and this is not even an exhaustive survey. They reach at least 75 countries. I actually think it's more than that. And they're showing some very interesting and very creative responses that are really responding to some of those gaps in COVID response that I mentioned. We are going to talk about a few of them today, including showing a video about one, and then we're going to take a deeper dive. But just a few that I want to highlight for you. In Bangladesh, where UNDP has had a long relationship with the A2I team working together with the Bangladesh government, there was a good context or a good platform on which that the COVID response could be scaled up. So an example of that was creating a kind of Uber pool of doctors that has now 4,000 doctors in it, that has served over 350,000 patients. In Moldova, we see a remote learning platform that's been set up to support teachers and students, with over 77,000 users right now. And then in Mauritius, we have a very interesting story where something that our Singapore Center for Technology and Innovation did, they put a resource out globally that was about open source solutions to COVID for governments to look at. And by adapting that, the government of Mauritius was able to save a significant amount of money in terms of how they were responding to the health support with the health support system using an open source versus a proprietary software base. A very interesting and compelling example. But I want to actually also now turn to a short video, which has been made by one of our innovators in the Colombia country office, where a very interesting take on mobile phone data has been used to look at high movement areas so that we can understand where government efforts to target COVID can be made most effective. So I'll just turn over to that video just for about 2 minutes.
Hello, everyone. I'm Angelo Moreno. I am the Technical Assistant Information in the UNDP Colombia Country Office. I would like to show you a very interesting tool that is called the Municipal Level Tracking of Mobility. The story starts in April when UNDP and Grand Data launched a platform that facilitates the analysis of people's movements outside their homes. This allows to the government to analyze the degree of mobility from the start of the pandemic using heat maps areas with more vulnerability variables. This part of the story, it's important to highlight the support of the Acceleration Lab in analyzing and interpreting this information for different scenarios. Let's see one example. Here is the official tool of National Department of Statistics in Colombia, using different layers. For example, we can see here the multidimensional poverty index, vulnerability level groups, older people, medical centers, and here is the mobility layer. For example, for the city of Bogota, we can activate the multidimensional poverty layer, and we can activate the mobility daily tracking. The red color means higher mobility, and we can activate these changes over the territory. And we can see this information for another regions, another small cities or districts. In the future, we hope to obtain more information and get better information to take better decision. But now this information is very important because allow us to continue monitoring changes over the territory with very different contexts. And in this way, get better and rich analysis around the development in Colombia. Thank you. Ciao.
So those are just a few examples of the different areas. And we could have had, as I mentioned, we have over 180 of these responses. And they really are showing some tremendous creativity and responsiveness to the crisis. So and I want to turn now to now just a little bit of a segment where we go a little bit deeper into another example of COVID response. And I want to introduce a couple of special guests and a special project that's going on. So we're going to talk about a project that's in Uganda and do a little bit of a deep dive to one of the activities or the projects that's gone on there with Jumia Food Uganda, which is a leading e-commerce company in the country, where they launched an online marketplace in a collaboration with UNDP to connect farmers with consumers at the time of COVID, with a particular focus on including people who are involved in the informal trade sector, such as women, youth, and persons with disabilities. So really trying to target those who have been most affected by COVID-19. So far, more than 1,200 vendors in 7 markets have already been trained and connected to selling their produce online. And we're going to just show a short intro to that, and then I'm going to introduce our special guests.
The United Nations Development Programme and Jumia Uganda are partnering to bring the food market close to the consumers of fresh food using an online platform. The launch of the digital platform is seen as a game changer in connecting informal market vendors to customers online. Digital platforms have become more relevant due to the shocks and disruptions of the supply chain caused by the COVID-19 pandemic. Partnership comes at a time when majority of Uganda's population is on lockdown, which has limited the access to fresh food markets. However, the initiators of this e-commerce initiative are more focused on the future of shopping, which is bound to change drastically in the coming months.
Now it's my pleasure to introduce, and I'm going to just do something a little digital here and change the mood a little bit. We're going to have a fireside chat with 2 special guests. I'm very pleased to welcome Elsie Atafua and Ron Kawamara. Elsie Atafua has over 20 years of experience in program development and implementation. She has worked nationally and internationally in sectors such as social development, environment and climate change, and more. Before taking the role of resident representative in Uganda, she managed UNDP's Climate and Forest Office in Africa, providing technical guidance to 28 countries. Ron Kawamara has been the CEO of Jumia Uganda for almost 2 years, serving as the regional managing director of Jumia Food East Africa before. Ron has a wealth of experience in the African e-commerce industry, and he's passionate about startups and tech-powered businesses. He's a co-founder of Tech Hub, an incubator and shared space facility in Kampala. Elsie and Ron, thank you very much for being with us and for being willing to tell us a little bit about your very interesting project with Jumia and UNDP. My first question would be to Elsie. And Elsie, I'm wondering, can you just tell us a little bit about how COVID-19 is affecting Uganda, who the most affected populations are, and why did UNDP look to an e-commerce solution as a means of responding?
Well, thank you very much, Rob, for the invitation. And also thanks to Erika, Kaulian, colleagues in the Regional Bureau for Africa for having us here. And thanks to the member states who are tuned in, whose generosity we really appreciate. It allows us to do some of the things that we are doing, which is very creative. Now, just coming back to your question, let me start off by saying Uganda is a beautiful country in East Africa, 43 million people, landlocked, has one of the youngest population in Africa, hosts about 1.42 million refugees, and has been also battling beyond COVID, also floods and also locusts. Now, this is quite important context because it links to the conversation that we're going to be having. Now, how has COVID impacted Uganda? Multiple ways. The health systems have been overstretched. The national crisis system, again, been tested. From the socioeconomic point of view, I mean, UNDP has led a really incredible and amazing work looking at the impacts of COVID. And we can see, for example, the informal sector, where most of the population are when it comes to employment, has been impacted. We see about 60% of SMEs going to lose businesses, about 40% of them may go into poverty. We see tourism being hit big because the country is going to lose about 5 billion in 5 years here in Uganda. So from that point of view, we are seeing a lot of a negative impact. From the poverty side, we are seeing about 2 to 8% of the population are going to slip back into poverty, and already 2 million people are already in poverty. So from a development point of view, we're really seeing the impact, including on the sustainable development goals, especially on SDG 1, on poverty. We're seeing that most likely there's going to be a slip of about 17%. So all in all, we've seen these kind of impacts. From a social point of view, gender-based violence has increased, crime has increased, and even environment point of view, people don't see that, but it's also very real. Poaching has increased as a result of the fact that the rangers are not able to do what they can do during the lockdown period. Now, coming back, who is impacted in this? And the population, I just want to say who is affected, the young people. I mean, Uganda has, like I said, one of the youngest population in the world. 78% of the population are below the age of 35. And between 18 to 30 years, 23% of the population. So you can see who is affected. From a leaving no one behind, we see that women, youth, persons with disabilities, and the elderly are the most affected. Now, what is exciting that despite the fact that we're seeing the negative impact, we're also seeing the opportunities through digitalization, which is incredible for us, and that's why we stepped in as UNDP here. Now, a couple of points, Rob, just to underscore some of the things we've been doing. First, from a health point of view, it becomes very important that with digitalization, we are able to help the country stay ahead of the curve. What does it mean practically? Now, you are decongesting markets by allowing people to stay at home where they can buy their tomatoes, their peppers, their onions online. So by fusing the online consumer with the market vendor, the woman, the man who is selling in the market, you are actually helping to reduce the risk and exposure to COVID. But importantly also, when we come back to the informal sector that I talked about, leaving no one behind, this allows us to help the young people, the women, to come back, in terms of employment, jobs, which have been impacted as a result of COVID. We also see opportunities, great opportunities from a digital point of view. Like I said, for the first time in the history of Jumia, and of course, here in UNDP Uganda, we're connecting vendors with people online. Normally, everybody who's going on Jumia is buying maybe, I don't know, iron, clothes, things like that. But now they're buying the tomatoes, including myself. So we're creating a business model, which is very interesting, where we're helping the micro, small, medium scale enterprises to pivot their strategies, to rethink their strategies, to see new ways of doing business. And for us, the partnership with the private sector, particularly Jumia, becomes very key and very exciting in that regard. But two big points as I wrap up on this, Rob, is for us seeing digitalization as a locomotive or an interlocutor with other parts of the development agenda. Now, if you look at it from even a climate point of view, by the fact that I'm not driving my car to the market, we are reducing emissions. We are promoting green cities. So there's a link between digitalization and the planet. There is a link between digitalization and the people when it comes to livelihood and poverty reduction. There's a link between digitalization and peace, because by having people more at home with their families and the social cohesion, all these things are important. And the partnership also goes beyond Jumia. We are partnering with the Ministry of Trade, for example, on standards, the Kampala City Authority on safety issues, the National Authority on Information and Technology. These partnerships are opening spaces where we are beginning to look into the future of development. That's what I wanted to end with, because when Erika started off and said beyond 2030, building resilience, recovery, and repositioning the development agenda, digitalization will be one of the things that will be instrumental in transforming our economies, and we are beginning to see the results with this partnership with Jumia. So really, it's been exciting for us doing something that is novel, something that is transformational, and I believe that Ron is going to speak a bit more about some of the things that we are doing as well, but the partnership has offered opportunity to open avenues and help promote the informal economies, SMEs, like never before. So let me just hold up on that, and I think I'll come back to some of the details on what exactly UNDP did at some point in the conversation.
Thank you, Elsie. That's great. And Ron, I'm just wondering if you could, thank you for joining us. I'm wondering if you can tell us just a little bit about the Jumia platform and how it actually works in this context with linking the farmers with consumers. Just what does that digital solution actually look like?
Well, indeed, Jumia is the leading e-commerce platform in Africa. We're in 11 countries, but specifically, this is the first time we do anything of this sort in partnership with any UN agency, and more precisely focusing on the informal sector, farmers, focusing on people who are doing fresh produce. And so with this partnership, we've been able to create a platform that allows informal market vendors. In Kampala, we started with about 7 markets. So far, we've been able to enroll more than 1,200 vendors or individuals who are selling on the platform to customers in Kampala. And the premise of this is that Jumia creates the technology, the platform. Jumia trains the vendors in terms of pricing, quality assurance, packaging. Jumia offers the logistics to the end user. And Jumia does the advertising. These market vendors are able to tap into this end-to-end solution that the UNDP in Uganda and Jumia have been able to put together. But most importantly is that for the first time, these vendors are having access to hundreds of thousands of customers in Kampala who are already used to buying online, but they typically don't buy fresh produce. They're buying electronics, they're buying fashion. And so this has created a market for these vendors. It has allowed these vendors also to understand more about the business. What we've found already is that there's value in streamlining the business. Vendors understanding how much they're making, being able to have proof of revenues. And so the benefits have not just been the revenues they've made, the incremental sales, but also understanding the business. And we've helped them to understand how to scale the business, what products to add, what customers are looking for on our search engines. So we find that vendors are much more educated. They're able to build their online shops and own them and scale them. One of the learnings as well has been that the business-to-business opportunity this platform has offered these vendors. These vendors are able to sell to restaurants, to bigger businesses who are buying in bulk. And so, so far, I think Jumia, being a partner at UNDP with great experience in educating these informal markets and vendors, has been a good partnership.
Thanks very much, Ron. And Elsie, I'm going to turn back to you, and we have about 4 minutes left. I think this is a short fireside chat, so I apologize for the brevity, but we want to give some time also for our participants to ask us questions. There's actually been some traffic in the chat that I'm lightly monitoring here, including some questions around infrastructure. So I wonder if I can just ask you a little bit about, what do you see emerging in Uganda as a result of, COVID-19? And you mentioned before kind of an increased role for digitalization. How do we make sure that the infrastructure is there? And have you had any of those discussions in the Uganda context?
Yes, thank you very much. I think when I started off earlier on, I talked about the need for partnership, and this is where it starts from. We are already in discussions with the Ministry of ICT, for example, the national authority that regulates issues around communication, the private sector, because the cost of internet is actually high. And only 14 million people out of Uganda's population have access to internet. So issues around, incentives, issues around the cost of internet, issues around investment, and into this kind of thing becomes very, very crucial for us. So yes, there's a lot of thinking around that, and I think part of the work that we are doing, like I said, with the Ministry of Trade, with the Ministry of Finance, and with the private sector companies, is exactly to see how best we can be able to look into those things. Now, in terms of experiences as well, there are other areas that we are beginning to learn about, including on traceability, for example, on standardization. In our markets here in Africa, we have the onions in buckets, we have the tomatoes in buckets. We can't continue to do that. Now, how do you standardize some of these things? We also have issues around how do you trace who sold this particular tomatoes to who. These are all things that we are looking into. But in terms of experience, I mean, we've had now incredible requests from government, from trade to justice to energy to everybody wanting support because they can see that this is the future. And for us, it's an important space as UNDP to continue to engage in, building on some of the things we have done in the past. For example, UNDP Uganda provided the first Zoom licenses to the government to be able to ensure business continuity. How do we scale this up? How do we design programs to really ensure that the infrastructure is there, whether it comes to the literacy aspects of it, because people need to know how to use this equipment and also how to engage when it comes to issues around the internet course. These are all areas that we are investing in, Rob.
Thank you, Elsie. Ron, I would, if you feel free to also answer that question about infrastructure challenges in Uganda, but beyond that, I also wanted to turn to you with a little bit of a risky question, which is about how has the partnership process with UNDP been? There was one question in the chat already about what is the partnership process UNDP uses for private sector, but tell us how your experience has been with this partnership so far.
Well, it's been great. Obviously, this is a natural alliance in the sense that the UNDP is very interested in the informal sector. And as Elsie mentioned, the people who have been mainly affected in the city of Kampala, for example, are the young people, the women. 60% of the people who are selling now on this UNDP Jumia platform are women. These are people who otherwise would probably be home now and not able to sell because access to the markets has been limited due to the public transport limitations. And so the partnership has been great in that sense that it's two organizations that do care about the vendor. Jumia at its core connects the buyer to the seller. Now, I have to admit, this is not a segment that I was particularly interested in before this partnership, or Jumia was specifically trying to reach. And so the UNDP has in a way created this opportunity for private sector companies like ourselves to look at the informal sector, to look at the small market vendors, not just as small players, but a big part of the economy, and people actually who can benefit and contribute to the tech scene that's developing on the African continent. The e-commerce is growing and growing very fast, but for so long, the informal sector, the small vendors have been left out, SMEs. Those who are participating are the big brands, the Samsungs, the Apples, they're doing well online, but the small guys have not been participating, and for so long the private sector has not looked there. So for us now, it's an opportunity. We've seen that there's a lot of interest in customers who want products from these vendors. We've seen that these market vendors are very savvy. They know business. They've been able to survive in these markets for so long. They wanted this opportunity to be able to use technology to scale their businesses. And so the UNDP has created this this chance, and we are very confident from these first few months of this pilot that it's taking up on both on the vendor side. The vendors, the market vendors have bought into it. They see the incremental revenue sales. Of course, the UNDP brings in a lot of credibility that sometimes the private sector doesn't have. And as Jumia, we're committed not just to do this in Uganda, but to pilot this in other countries. We are very confident that even after this partnership probably is no longer being acted on the same way, that it makes commercial sense to continue to do this. It makes sense for our customers. It makes sense for the market vendors. It's potentially a big revenue stream for these vendors and for e-commerce platforms like Jumia. So I think it's a win-win for all the parties involved, and we appreciate the partnership we've received from the UNDP. The vendors, most importantly, have enjoyed this. More markets want to be part of this, and we're careful to make sure that we take the right lessons, that we listen to these vendors, and that we're building something that works for them, that in ways that they feel they're comfortable with. And so it's a learning process at the same time as something that we feel we can scale quickly.
Great. Thanks to both of you. We'll end the fireside chat there. If you can stick around for a question period, that would be great, because I see a few questions on Uganda coming through, and I'm sending it back to Ulrika. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Robert, Elsie, and Ron, and please do stay on if you have the opportunity, because we hope to have some more questions or suggestions. Also, please use the chat or the Q&A function. But Elsie, perhaps the question we have in the Q&A with regard to nutrition and educational programs in Uganda, do you have an answer to that? And then colleagues online, please ask your questions.
So what exactly was the question again, Erika?
So there was a question with regard to nutrition or education programs. What have we seen being developed in Uganda? Camilla asks us.
Well, in terms of education, I mean, for at least from the UNDP side, of course, in partnership with the other agencies, if we look at it from a COVID lens point of view, we're beginning to look into issues around, e-learning, for example, which provides an opportunity then to be able to go at scale with the schools closed down, and we still have the schools closed down. So a couple of things that are happening there. The UN family is supporting the government, for example, getting more radios where you can then have schooling, for example, online by listening to some of the programs that are being taught through the radio. So when we're looking at it from a COVID lens, which I believe is a question, then of course these are some of the things that we are doing. But coming back to education, depends on how you're looking at it. Skilling becomes a core part of education by extension, where some of the things that we are doing with Jumia, and indeed some of the things that we are doing with the youth, we just recently launched a youth facility with Stanbic Bank, where we are going to be skilling over 50,000 young people. These are some of the things that we are doing, where we're giving them, corporate governance training skills, business development skills, and all that as part of a package to support the issues of addressing unemployment in Uganda. Of course, when the issues around nutrition is quite a big one. I mean, the country, there are quite some variations in the country where some parts of the country, particularly in the Karamoja areas, are food deficient. And therefore, again, our work in the UN family, working with WFP, FAO, and others, is really to seek how best we can support that. So nutrition certainly becomes part of the agenda in the UN family, not only in terms of the number of things we're producing, but the quality as well becomes part of the conversation. So this is part of the things that we are doing as a UN family beyond UNDP.
Thank you so much, Elsie. And indeed, the Human Development Report Office, they have produced a very interesting report looking closely into the area of education and digital possibilities, and we have quite, of course, a concern with regard to that now, given the situation that we're in and the many students that cannot study online. Hao Liang, we have a question with regard to how we integrate also our digital offer into other areas of work. Can I invite you to speak about that? Please, Hao Liang.
Yeah, thank you very much. Rob, mentioned the example in Bangladesh. I think Bangladesh is a very good example of digital being an integral part of UNDP's work. And over the last 10 years, we have worked with the government and with donors, to establish a network of digital service provision throughout the country. With that, system, you can not only provide the services, that people need, for everyday life, and they also created a wealth of data, for government policy innovation. Okay? So practically, it has become the most, vibrant government policy innovation lab, in developing world. I think that was a very good example. So digital is part of everything that government does now. So during COVID, for example, they created doctors' pools, right, for telemedicine, for example. So telemedicine is a reality in Bangladesh. Right? So you can use this. And I think we have also mentioned the example from India, right? India using electronic systems, a database system to manage it. The entire vaccine stock of India. Right? So with a cell phone today, you can know the type, the quantity, and the temperature of vaccine in every refrigerator in the cold chain of India, right? For its vaccine management. So this way, you can actually allow, healthcare service delivery reliably at the local level. Right? And not only it has been used for vaccine, obviously, it has also created a network. Again, a big data, a platform for use in detecting, what kind of trends are there, in different, regions and for different issues. And again, during COVID, this system is being used to increase, the targeting of population in 9 out of the 30 states, for particular types of response. Right? And we also have, for example, examples from Malawi, in Africa, right? Where the government, is using geo-referential data for district level planning to get, hotspots, for SDGs. Right? And they're using, as I think my Columbia, office colleague mentioned, many governments are using GIS-based data database, for planning and policy purposes. So in Malawi, there's also a similar attempt, but they focus to a lower level, right? They overlay different layers of data, socioeconomic data with geographical data and so forth, right? And look at the different areas. So each layer you can see, based on the indicators you choose, the areas that is doing better than the others and so forth. So by overlaying this data, you see which areas have the most serious problems. So the government can target these areas, in effect, especially. So there are many such examples and that we're using. There's another effort in the Philippines, right? The government wants to cover the rural areas with Wi-Fi, right? So they are working with the UNDP, to find the best solutions to this. So what we do is that we don't know solutions ourselves. We're not an expert in Wi-Fi setup, right, or telecom field. But we can work with government in partnership with ITU, for example, right? And so we can bring a set of partners together and to co-create solutions for a complex problem. So I would say that digital is very much part of what we do. A last point I want to mention: we did publish a vision paper for what kind of world we want to see, after COVID, right? And one of the tipping points we talked about is the likely deeper use of the digital technology, right? For a world, that will require more digital solutions in line with the reality that COVID has created. So we are putting this on our public website as well, so we can, I think you will soon, have access to the paper as well. Over.
Thank you so much, Haoyang. And of course, you find a lot of useful documents on our website. Let's see if we can also post here with a link, both the document that you mentioned, Haoyang, and also, of course, you see the link to the plan Beyond Recovery, moving towards 2030. Robert, we also have a question with regard to harmonization of our engagement with SMEs. Maybe that's not your area of work. I don't know if you have comments, but also to say to you who asked the question online that you can also find answer to that question, and we'll find a link for you. We have, as the UN Development Program, brought to our headquarters a finance sector hub where we are actually trying to harmonize and also use the strength of UNDP being present in so many countries. Of course, adapting locally to the needs, but then drawing on the lessons learned. And this is the strength of us, I believe, as a development program. But Robert, would you like also to comment on the integration of the digital solutions and follow up on Haoyang's question?
Sure. I mean, I do think Haoyang may also have a comment on that, because there's different teams within his area that are also working on this. But we certainly see a lot of e-commerce work coming out as a result of COVID. I mentioned before, the Jumia example is one of those. It's only one. There are quite a few examples coming out where it's innovative ways of supporting that sector, which is so vulnerable, as we saw in the Uganda context and beyond as well. So I know our colleague Nick has also put a reference in here to the private sector strategy that we have. So we do have that kind of high-level guidance in terms of the mandate that is being given to country office to work with that, but there's quite a lot of creativity involved in how we actually respond to a specific context. And we certainly see that borne out by the digital examples. Ulrika, if you don't mind, I'd like to maybe just make one addition to the previous question, which is around digital as an integrator. And just to kind of specifically reference in the context of the Beyond Recovery document that is being shared, and the four pillars rather, it is absolutely the case that digital is an enabler across the entire offer. So within the governance work, within social protection work, which was discussed yesterday, in fact, that's a good example to use. Social protection work is being enabled by digital. So there are examples of the Togo example of how digital payments for social service or social benefits were able to be scaled up so rapidly in Togo as a result of the usage of digital platforms. So we know that it's not a distinct piece of work where you say, this is all just digital here, this is all just social protection here, this is all just governance here, and so on. It is that digital is really an enabler across the board. But we saw so much, I would say, so much response or so much interest and demand in digital that we felt that it deserved a pillar on its own for this policy document in the COVID-19 response. So governments that needed assistance in terms of that infrastructure connection, connecting civil servants to be able to make government work online, the digital tools and even the advice and guidance, there was enough there that we felt that pillar was well deserved. So it really is an integrator across the other pillars.
Thank you, Rob. And Elsie, you also have some concrete examples with regard to the so-called integrator role that UNDP has been given and the possibility to use our broad mandate to bring good solutions to complex problems. Elsie, please.
Yeah, so thank you very much, Erika, for that. I think there are two dimensions of looking at this question. The integrator role is for UNDP to become a support platform for the UN system. That's one interpretation of where we are looking at innovative approaches. So if you look at it from that point of view, and you look at the example of Jumia, what we are doing now, we are already having conversations with UN women to make sure that they are also encouraging women farming, that the women farmers can be able to sell on that line, meaning we are creating a platform for UN women and the clients are served to be able to come on board. FAO is the same thing. So we are using that role of ours to be able to bring the system on board on something that is very creative in this particular way. The other way of looking at it is the intersection, like I said earlier on, between digitalization and the other offers that we have. Now, if you take, for example, green growth, which is one of the offers we have, and the links between digitalization and green growth. Now, when we started the Jumia partnership, for example, I started buying online myself just to be able to see what was happening. They started bringing everything in plastics to us. So immediately we said, no, we have to go green on this and we have to show example. We stopped using the plastics and now we are using biodegradables, reusables, where we are also creating employment for other women who are using, be able to use local products to create some of this. So we started off with digitalization, but you can see the links now, like I said, with green growth. Now, when you come to the issues around governance, it's not only about political governance, it's the governance of things, how efficient we are in processes, how effective we are. So if we can be able to connect online, such that the government itself is saving money, such that we are able to connect people in a way that we have not done before, and that corporate governance is changing the way they're doing business. Like Ron said, we are doing something different from a governance point of view. So from an integrator role point of view, there is a link, A, amongst the 3 other offers that we have, but B, as a system supporter, we are able to support the system as a whole by opening doors for others to engage in. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Elsie. And thank you, Nick, also for providing good links. There was a question if we can also provide the link to the private sector strategy that was mentioned by Hao Liang earlier, and you also answered to that question. If we don't have more questions online, I would like to hand over once again to you, Hao Liang, please.
Okay, thank you very much, Erika and Rob and the colleagues, for this discussion. I think, our plan is to close the discussion by 10 o'clock. I think, what I've, gathered from this discussion is that, sorry, let me, a lot of noise in New York. Sorry about this. I think one thing that I've got is that, when we talk about the digital strategy and so forth, one part is clearly about internal UNDP's effort. UNDP has to make it itself more digital savvy, right? So a lot of the work that the Chief Digital Officer, and his office, are doing is to make sure that the UNDP, itself, is digitally capable, right? And have the right, mentality and skill sets and applications, to make our work more effective, more efficient, more accountable, right? And so that we are in a better position to support our governments. The kind of, examples, I think Rob mentioned 15, right? Internal, digital projects that we're implementing, sponsored by at corporate level, plus many others, at different levels, is to make UNDP, more capable. And if we have had more time, if we organize such a session again, we can actually showcase some of the really exciting initiatives that that we can really demonstrate. And the other part of the digital is to use digital technology to support development, right? And in this regard, I think Rob also presented very well that it's not only about technology, right? It is about the digital solutions, the softwares in themselves, but also equally importantly is about the policies and the regulatory frameworks that enable the use of technology, establishment of infrastructure, and development and application of these solutions. So I think this is what the UNDP is trying to do. And there are a lot of examples that came out in this discussion. I think the Uganda example is very exciting, right? The Colombia example is also very exciting. It's just, like, to me, it's like a teaser of what lies behind it, right? And also, I think one thing we've found out, is that we actually, it's not surprising, right? We don't know solutions to every problem, right? Especially when it comes to digital solutions. Sometimes the private sector are way ahead of us, right? But the UNDP, can be the platform, right? Can play the role of the integrator to bring partners together. This is what we've seen. I think Rob mentioned our work in Singapore, as a center for, for innovation and technology, for sustainable development. And the project that the center is doing right, is to work with the best in the industry in hardware, production, right, to have open source competition for solutions, for hardware solutions that will have an implication for COVID response, such as testing, for example, such as monitoring tools, and so forth, right? So it's not necessary that solutions have to come from UNDP, right? So solutions can come from our partners, but we have to be credible for partners to come, to work with us, right? So that I think is a lot, what we're trying to do. And one thing, I think yesterday there was a question about Accelerator Labs. I think the colleague from Colombia also touched on Accelerator Labs, right? And there was a question of how Accelerator Labs are connected to UNDP's overall strategy and so forth. I think Accelerator Labs, has been a shock in a way to the system, right? Because UNDP has been investing in innovation for many years, but not at the intensity, right? The 60 labs that brings at the same time, right? So, but and also we are now in the process of launching more, a second generation Accelerator Labs, right? To bring this to more countries. So we're learning from the first wave of Accelerator Labs experience, right? Which focused mostly really on a lot of quick solutions and experimentation type of solutions, demonstrating the effectiveness of solution mapping, right? Horizon scanning and other innovation tools, right? But now we're also combining our efforts, such as digital transformation, Accelerator Labs, and also our innovation facility that Denmark has been supporting for many years, right? So we're now also moving to systems transformation approach to tackle complex issues, right? If we're talking about any issue, like some participants were asking questions about digital infrastructure, right? It's not something that we can sort out as the UNDP, right? It's a national development strategy issue, right? That will require careful discussion, framing of the issue, and the formation of partnerships and the clarification of investment strategy and so forth, right? But I think we now have the confidence that we can work with our partners to tackle these complex issues, even though we don't know solutions ourselves, but we believe we know how we approach these issues. And we have a lot of assets, as you have seen from this demonstration, right? So I think we're confident that if we really focus strategically on the challenges and work in a very concrete way, and I believe that our partnership can, do some good, for our developing country partners. I will stop here, Erika.
Thank you so much, Hao Liang, and thank you, colleagues, especially Ron and Elsie joining us, but of course then also Robert and your team working to guide us, but doing so in partnership. And as you say, Hao Liang, we need to find new and what we call sometimes innovative ways of working, but we need to do it together. We live in unprecedented times, and development finance is a scarce resource at the time when we need it the most. So we really need to work together, and UNDP want to continue to invite you and whoever you think would have use of these kind of conversation. We have been rewarded once again, I must say, as the most transparent UN agency, and we would like to continue to be that, because we believe that your questions and suggestions make us even better. And as we've said along this conversation, we cannot do it on our own. We need to do it together. And we've had a discussion with regard to our new offer, Beyond Recovery Towards 2030, discussing social protection yesterday, today digital disruption, and then next week, Thursday, 27th of August, same time, green economy. So don't miss that. And then Friday, 28th of August, we're going to discuss governance and the building of a new social contract. Of course, a very interesting discussion, and where we need a lot of good questions and ideas to come to us. So please do invite colleagues or people that you think would be interested, and join us. And if you can't join us, look for us and you know where to find us, and we will try to answer your questions and see what kind of partnerships we can bring. Thank you very much for this conversation to all colleagues who have also prepared the conversation, and we're looking forward to see you again. Thank you, and bye-bye.